Hello, friends, and welcome back to the show. Today, I spoke to Eyla Cuecna from uncoveringbirth.com. She is a birth worker, doula, and an expert in this field with over a decade of experience and thousands of births. And we talk about how birth is really a portal into a radical new identity, how medicalized birth often overlooks the unique needs of the individual and creates a scenario where the mother and the baby can be put under unnecessary risk. We talk about the truth behind the term geriatric pregnancy and who gets to benefit from such harmful narratives. And we talk about why we are in a postpartum depression epidemic. This is a really radical and empowering conversation about one of the most impactful and important rites of passage that a woman and the husbands can go through. And I think you're going to get a lot out of it. So let's get into the show. Eyla, what's crazy about your Instagram profile is your first pinned post, the kind of pipeline from ultrasound to emergency C-section, described almost exactly what happened to my wife and I 5.5 years ago, like to a T. And that was the first thing I saw on your profile. And I was like, wow, she gets it. And that hit, and it made me like relive what we went through. Long story short, and we can come back to it, but that was a really big initiation moment for us, a big healing moment. My wife got a really amazing reclamation story from that, and then a radical wild free birth thereafter with my second born. But yeah, man, did that hit the nail on the head. How did you get started in this crazy world?
Yeah, well, I can only imagine the arc that you both experienced, well, you all experienced in this, and it's all too common. And sometimes when we can see it laid out like that, it kind of helps with the integration, you know, because as you might have experienced, there wasn't a lot of opportunity for integration after an experience like that. We don't have those resources, you know. So you took it into your own hands and had a redemptive birth following, which is great. I started doing, I got into the birth world because I was working in the foster care system in the United States, and it was deeply frustrating and really dark, actually. Just heavy experience for me, energetically, psychically, emotionally, and just to witness what was going on and all the deficits in our foster care system. And so I knew that trying to fix it, right? It's almost like trying to put out to fix a leak, where it's like with my experience in construction, because of the the home we're working on right now, it's like when you plug it up somewhere else, it bursts open elsewhere, and that's how it was with the foster care system. It's like, okay, well, let's add more funding here, but then there's this other issue that arises here, and let's just, if we have more resources there, but then you can never keep up with it. So if we were to reverse engineer the issues with the foster care system, it comes down to how men and women are initiated into adulthood, actually, so it's if we go upstream like that, we see that there is just such a deficit in the way that we're initiated. Then of course there is no ritual around becoming a parent. There's no holding. There's a lot of unchecked trauma, and then we get into certain situations and dynamics, one of which is medicalized birth, which can then lead to a huge disconnect in how a woman parents and even how a man parents and their connection to their family in and of itself. So as I went on that journey, I decided to pursue work in birth education and assisting births as a doula, and just working on exposing what's possible and where we can shift, and that really took off.
Yeah, it's amazing. It's very interesting that you use that framing of like what's possible in birth, because I think for a lot of people, partly due to the fact that most people are asleep to this world or unconscious to it, that they don't even realize, a lot of people, that there is the possibility for you to take your birth into your own hands outside of the system. I remember when my wife first told me 6 years ago that she wanted a home birth. I wasn't initially opposed to the idea at all, but the first thing I thought was like, can you do that? Is that legal? And it's just very interesting going through all of that, because I just assumed, particularly as a man, that all birth was done in the hospital. And now learning from people like yourself and watching my wife's journey and being there for that first C-section, and then being in the contrast of a different birth,
Mm.
3 or some years later, and just being like, oh, these are completely different worlds. And I think you have to be a bit of a trailblazer in a sense to try and just shake somebody out of the stupor and even show them that, like, hey, there, if that's what you want, that's okay. But most people haven't consciously chose that. They've just been put on the kind of conveyor belt system, and that there is a choice for how you want to birth and everything in between. And that doesn't necessarily mean, radical free birth, but there's so
Right.
much more power that you have over this whole process from conception through to delivery. So I just think that's very empowering framing. And yeah, I know a lot of people, and maybe even some people listening to this, are like, never really thought about this before, which is good. Let's get them thinking.
Yeah, there's kind of like this witch hunt out for midwives too, not only socially, but also at this higher level, as politically and clinically, and so not a lot of people know that they can birth with a midwife, that they can go to a birth center outside of a hospital, that they can have a home birth. I mean, it is illegal in some states in the United States, in
Hmm.
Alabama, for example. But it's also heavily supported in a state like Utah. So depending on where you live, that shifts, the awareness about it shifts. But it's just a conventional wisdom that we're working in right now. It's like there's really only one way to do this. And it only took 2 generations for us to forget that we can birth differently.
Very good point. Yeah, and that's one of the things that I think about a lot, which is that obviously women know how to do this. They've done it forever, and then it's interesting to try and wrestle with this idea that we are given or perpetuated in the media that, but birth is so dangerous, it's so scary, and all you ever see on TV is images of like the woman screaming and the doctor saving the day, and that instills you with this belief that, like, oh well, you have to have a birth inside of a hospital, because if you don't, it's going to go horribly wrong, right? And then
Right.
you tap in a little bit to this ancestral wisdom and say, well, it can't be that bad, or we wouldn't be here. And of
Right.
course, there's all kinds of pushback there, because people will say, "But how many infant mortality rates, etc., etc." But again, this is fundamentally, to me, a nod to the ancestral way of things, not necessarily romanticizing those and saying this is how it's got to be for everybody, but remembering something that we have desperately lost, which is birth, which is initiations. Like you said, we don't have those anymore, and I think it's making us very sick as a culture. And it's a conversation to me about giving people something like informed decision making, informed consent,
Yeah.
like putting an option on the table and saying, like, hey, this could be differently. So being somebody that is, one of the witches, for want of a better term, that is sometimes hunted, what do you think are some of the bigger problems with the medicalized system of birth?
Oh, well, I just want to speak to that point you made about people being under the idea, the belief that birth outcomes improved because of hospitals,
Mm,
right? So we didn't really start birthing in hospitals until the 1890s. In the US and Western Europe. And before that, there were high fetal and maternal mortality rates simply because we were living in these cramped cities without sophisticated plumbing, without sophisticated systems. We were malnourished. We left the villages, we left the countryside, and we put ourselves in these very unhuman, unsupportive environments. So we weren't really thriving on many levels. And then we were trying to do this thing, which is be pregnant and give birth and postpartum in a structure that really didn't support that. So we were seeing a lot of cases of infection, postpartum hemorrhage, malnourishment, different types of diseases. So when we started birthing in hospitals, there was this barrier of the postpartum experience being a little bit more supported, and
mm,
there was more of a watchful eye on the woman. She had a system of support, whereas she wasn't getting that anymore in the city. Where she had that in the village, but she didn't have it in the city. So we did see an improvement, not because birth is inherently dangerous and we need the hospital in order to do it. It's because we were in an environment that was better than, these cramped quarters in
right.
New York City or London or wherever it was. So I just want to be clear that we have to look at what was happening socially and culturally around us and how that was impacting,
Hmm.
our nourishment as a community and how we were birthing. Um, And so when we look at, what is what are the major problems in the way that we're birthing now? I think that was your question, right? Like
Yeah.
the conventional system. It's really that there's this like one size fits all approach, which we see in the health field, in the conventional health field with pharmaceuticals and all types of approaches. We see it with education. We see it with all of these systems, right? It's like I'm going to overlay this generic system onto incredibly unique beings
Mm,
who have a tapestry of experiences and histories and needs. And if it doesn't work, well, then surgery, you know, if it doesn't work, well, then, pharmaceutical. So the problem is that we're doing something natural and um, completely normal and biological within a system that doesn't really support those rhythms. I guess
mm,
that's the most simple way to say it. And it benefits the system for us to feel that we have no choice, right? So rather than an extensive list of choices, we're given almost just like either A or B, right?
mm,
And that's how what you spoke to earlier is that women and men just don't know what's possible. And we think, well, what's the big deal? It's just giving birth. We don't realize that this is like an incredibly powerful portal into
mm,
a new identity. And we don't realize that it's an investment, uh, not only financially, of course, but energetically and emotionally and physically into the next generation. So
mm.
we've really lost the sanctity with birth. And that's one of the biggest problems. And yeah, if we follow who benefits from this system, it really goes back down to who's providing the drugs and medications. Where are the stem cells going during
Mhm.
birth, after birth, the cord blood, where is it going? The placentas, where are they going? We have to follow who's benefiting financially from this, and then we can see. It's not to say that people on the ground level are, have this nefarious agenda. Everyone
Mm,
is there to help. It's just that they're working within a framework and they're trained by an institution that doesn't have the individual well-being really at heart.
yeah, it's so well said. There's so much there. I like that call out at the end though, that because these institutions get captured in such a way that looks nefarious, it's not necessarily represented of nefarious individuals on the ground floor that usually get into these practices because they want to help. But it
Yeah.
is a sign to me of an unconscious system that when it's not done in the full awareness of what it can be, with that sanctity, with that reverence and respect, that it is eventually going to order itself towards corruption, and birth becomes a business. And I've had other guests on that have talked about things like what they do with the stem cells, what they do with foreskin after it's been circumcised. And it just blows your bloody mind. And at the same time, you're like, well, yeah, I'm not surprised actually, because our system is so sick and everything has become corporatized and captured, that one of the things you said is like a woman and maybe her partner too are presented A or B, which gives the illusion of choice, but they're presented basically a shit sandwich or a turd baguette. It's like, oh
Yeah.
great, this sounds delicious. They don't realize that option C is even on the table, which is,
Hmm.
what if I did this outside of the system? What if I didn't even have this guy that I've never met before telling me how it's going to be? What if I sought out a doula? What if I wanted to do
Right.
this with my husband, etc.? And I think that's really important, is to put that there is option C on the table. So with the over medicalization and the loss of the reverence and the respect for the ceremony that becoming a mother is, we're sold this false bill of goods that it's been a miracle and it saved so many children's lives, etc., etc. So let's park that for a minute, because you've gave some really good, healthy nuance to that idea there. But what is the cost of all of that progress? What has it done to mothers? What is appearing now in, whether it's childbirth, whether it's postpartum depression? Like, what is appearing as a consequence of this over medicalization after the birth?
Well, somewhere down the line, a very deep chasm was created, as far as the girl connecting to herself, right? There's somewhere down the line, because of how birth shifted, there was an inherent disconnect that was created between the mother and the baby,
Mm,
which then continued down generation after generation. And it's not to say that a woman with a highly medicalized birth and traumatic birth experience cannot connect to her child. But on the whole, because women are recovering from the trauma of birth and they're also needing to step into this new role, it is insurmountable. It feels
Mm.
insurmountable for most women. They can barely stay above water, or they have to suppress it to just move forward, which means that they can't necessarily be present and create healthy attachments with their babies. So if we continue to just pass that down, what we're seeing now is it makes sense to the disconnected individual to birth in this disconnected way.
Mm.
It's this isn't like wrong or bad, it's just what we do. It like, what more do you want from me, or what more am I supposed to do? So it's, I wouldn't say that someone is like, they don't want it to be this way. They don't know that it's disconnected. It simply is. And there's
Right.
this void, and so what we're seeing are a lot of children with attachment issues because
Yeah.
they're being created by a lot of adults with attachment issues. And, we our generation, right? So it's a product of that as well.
Yeah.
So there is a way that we birthed. There are hormones there's a cocktail of hormones that are released, to create that initial bond between the mother and the baby. And I'm oversimplifying this right now for the sake of the conversation. But when that is taken away, it's almost like a game of catch up,
Mm.
trying to catch up and trying to also meet the demands of the way we've set ourselves up socially. So the impact it's having is that we have a lot of dysregulated, unhealthily attached children and
Yeah.
young adults, and potentially, adults in later years of their lives, because this has been going on for a while.
Mm.
And I see it, right? It's in the zeitgeist at the moment. It's like attachment styles,
Yeah.
the avoidant, the anxiously attached, the disorganized, the securely attached, right? And so we're just trying to hack how to navigate it. We're not actually going back to the root of why this is happening, which is this initial bond, which starts in the womb. And
Mm.
then it continues to form between the mother and the baby. And we've left the father out. So it's like we're not even talking about that piece.
Wow.
And we have this idea that they're not really necessary because we've tried to replace, and say, well, the baby has that bond, the baby has the mother, what do they really need me for? We've edged men
Yeah.
out in many, many ways. And so, yeah, the product of this is really a disconnected society. And
Yes.
then we spend a better part of our adult lives, trying to reconnect with that child, trying to heal these attachments, trying to, you know, fill the void within. So, yeah, we're aware that something's going on, and we're
Mm.
just not really sure where it's coming from. But I have some ideas about it.
Yeah. Yeah. It sounds like it. And I think you're right. There is a looming sense that people can't quite put the finger on that something is very, very wrong. And I bet most people are probably pointing the finger of blame at things like government and it's Trump or it's this one or it's that one. And they're not going all the way back to what you just articulated so beautifully, which is like this is a human condition that's been baked into us from the moment of conception and how we were raised and that healthy level of attachment. I'm not sure if you've ever heard the Young quote. It was coming through as you were speaking, that he said something along the lines of the greatest task that a child must bear is the unfinished business of the parents. And it's basically saying beautifully what you said, that it's just going to keep echoing and echoing
Yeah.
and echoing through generational lines until somebody, for whatever reason, has the wherewithal to say, oh, wait a minute, like it has to stop here. And wow, can't birth be an incredible initiation to do that, to shatter all of these illusions? And like I reflected in my wife and I's story, and the whole ceremony that became in the aftermath. You mentioned the word trauma and alchemizing that, which is a term that you use a lot, into something else that redefined and rewrote that story, and how powerful
Yeah.
all of that is. It's just something that I think, yeah, maybe pause and reflect of like what was that for you, and are you one of these unconscious adults that hopefully is going to create life, but hopefully not do it in an unconscious way to raise unconscious kids who are now going to have to foot the bill for the work that you didn't do? It's a big ask, but I think that's probably something like what is going on, like you said, with this disconnected culture and disconnected people that were disconnected from the very beginning.
Yeah, and we don't really take into consideration the social burden on the rest of this community on Earth, how those choices we make with this individual child within our family structure, how that's impacting the rest of the community. It's so individualistic in the sense that
Yeah.
it's like me, the convenience of it.
Mhm.
And we don't see that this is actually impacting everyone, right? Because our children will eventually connect with other human beings. There are choices being made about the environment, about food, about education. And so we don't see the power that we have in this initiation. That's really lost, you know? It's so self-focused on navigating fear and suppressing trauma and trying to figure out how to kind of like tiptoe around the landmines that we forget that there's this bigger picture when we go through this process of creating life.
What is birth trauma then? Like that word is one that gets thrown around a lot now. How do you define that word? And then the follow up to that would be, what does somebody do with it, and what is alchemy? How do you turn that around?
Yeah, so I would say that things happen in birth all the time, and it's usually things that we don't expect. Even if it's positive, let's say, right? There's nothing serious, severe, or negative. It's just the events of birth and the transition into leaving behind a certain identity and now assuming different responsibilities and a new identity, right? So it's like there's that transition, and without an integration or a holding, it can suspend us in a state of survival. it can
Hmm.
it can be very taxing on the body in and of itself, so even that and not being able to fully integrate that and restore and nourish and heal, that can feel traumatic for many women. So there's also the other end of the spectrum where a woman plans to have a natural, unmedicated birth, and she ends up in an emergency C-section. So that's the other end of the spectrum, and that requires integration, not
Yeah.
only physically, but emotionally and mentally. So it helps to go over the events to understand how everything led to where it did, what can be done now, how can we hold space, and allow the mother to go through the grief, and also the father go through the grief of, the dream not being fulfilled in the way that they had hoped or planned. And there is no holding for that. I mean, in our conventional medical system, there might be a debrief offered if the hospital or doctor considers, the level of severity of the situation, and it's usually to cover their bases and they don't want to be sued,
Mm.
or the woman will go 6 weeks after her, her birth, and they'll just kind of check in on her, but it's not thorough and it's not the holding she needs. Even with midwifery care, they're spread very thin. They're not able to really offer that holding that a woman needs. They'll check in more than an OB might, but it's really not what the woman is requiring. So that lack of kinship, that lack of community, that lack of holding can basically be what catalyzes the events of the birth to become the trauma, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
So I think anything can go down at a birth, and if there's proper integration and holding afterwards and the proper nourishment, the woman can alchemize it and can get the support. This is why I get women even 10 years after birth, we'll do one-on-one sessions, and they realize I'm not over this. I'm still being haunted by many of the things that happened. And I'm fearful of even having another child. I feel shame and about, I feel shame in the fact that I've pushed my own child away in many senses because I resent the birth. There's so much that
Mm.
can come up. So when people say, oh, it happened 10 years ago, 20 years ago, women wouldn't still be contacting me even decades later to finally process what happened.
Yeah.
So, it's and sometimes the trauma doesn't occur in the birth itself, in the labor itself. It can happen postpartum.
Hmm.
Women can experience certain things that leave them feeling really dropped, really spread thin. They're in a hyper mobilized state, in their nervous system. They cannot differentiate between threat and non-threat. So it's like there's a lot that can happen when we don't have the proper framework for this
Yeah.
arc.
Yeah. Would you say there is an epidemic or an element of denying that for some women, that they they just, because they can't, you kind of get gaslit that as long as your baby's healthy, that's all that really matters, and that if you have a healthy baby, then, at the end of the day, I guess it was unfortunate that you didn't get the birth you wanted, but basically shut up and just be happy. And then they have to kind of go about living daily life and maybe feeling an internal struggle with that, which is like, okay, yeah, of course I'm happy my baby is healthy, but I didn't get what I wanted, and now I feel guilty for wanting something different. And am I a bad mom? And now subconsciously I'm pushing my kid. All of that stuff comes up. So, do you think that happens more commonly than we'd probably believe, or women would even admit?
Yeah, totally. And I've seen it firsthand. I've been at births when things take a turn. I've been at births where, because of medical error, the baby's life was lost, and I've seen and overheard certain people say, we need to be grateful for, you're here. You made it, and we did everything we could, and this will take time, right? Or, yes, despite what happened, you're alive and the baby's alive and everyone's here. It's like
Mm,
it's the ultimate gaslight, because it's like there's no acknowledgement of the level of grief that the woman is about to experience, or the father is. Again, he's not even included in the conversation. Meanwhile,
yeah,
he witnessed his wife or his partner and baby go through something incredibly
yeah,
severe, and he felt helpless, and there's no one to talk to about it.
yeah. Hmm.
And so it's yeah, I would say that this happens a lot, and just be grateful you're alive. So it's very outcome oriented within the birthing
Right.
system, meaning we just want the results. We don't want more, we don't want death. And whatever way we need to take to get there, we'll do it. And it doesn't matter what happens in the process, as long as we have that outcome.
Yeah.
So it's not process driven, it's outcome driven, and that could be very dangerous when it comes to birth, because it is not a medical condition. We're not
Right.
treating something, we're not trying to resolve an issue. There's no issue, but we treat it that way.
Hmm. I like that reframing from like outcome oriented to process oriented, because that's kind of goal setting 101, and it gets us in trouble in so many areas of our lives when we only optimize for outcomes. Because sometimes we get the outcome, but we're not happy with what we got because the process bent us out of shape to get it. So if somebody's
Yeah.
listening to this and they maybe are pregnant right now, they hope to get pregnant in the near future or one day, what are some of the guiding questions or things you would ask them to think about so that they can really think about the process? Like, how do you steer somebody to creating something that feels like a good, aligned, healthy pregnancy and birth plan for themselves? Where do you start with something like that?
Yeah, so the first question that I would ask, and a woman can simply ask herself if she's ready to have that honest dialogue, internal dialogue, is, what do I want from this experience? And it's a given that we want to feel healthy, and we want a healthy baby, right?
Hmm.
But what do we want it to look like? What do we want? What's your ideal? If there was no fear, what would it look like? And go from there. So then it's like, well, I would love to, have the baby at home in the water, let's say. However, my mother had this terrible experience, or
Mm,
my friend had this terrible experience, so I'm going to do it. So can we first identify what we want, and then how do we work through the fear of actually attaining that thing? And that's where the work is.
yeah.
Okay, so if, my friend had this emergency C-section, let me understand why these things happen. And so then we go into the realm of birth education, which most women don't do. They'll listen to maybe a podcast or two, they'll read a book, and that's kind of it. But there's actually quite a bit to unlearn. So I would ask women to set forth on the unlearning journey. We've been conditioned about what birth looks like since we're young, and we've, as women, very often are trained to self-betray, in the sense that whatever the body's telling us, we might need to go against it as a means of survival. So, if I don't want to do this thing, but in order to be a good compliant girl that's going to stay connected to my family and my tribe, I need to do that thing, right? So we're very cooperative as a form of survival. And then what ends up happening is, when it comes down to our initiation into womanhood or with birth, all that cooperation really doesn't help us in this situation.
Yeah.
So what do I want? What do I want it to look like? And what do I need to do to get there? And what do I have to let die in order to get those things?
Mm.
So I'd say that's the place to begin. And then, of course, a great birth education so that we can unlearn and relearn. We can really understand how all of these things are connected because it's a web, right?
Hmm.
So if we want to breastfeed, there are certain things that we need to do in order to get there. It's not just like, I'm on the other side, I want to breastfeed, let's do it. There are many things we can do to optimize the potential for that to be
Hmm.
successful. So setting goals, right? And then reverse engineering from there. Um, if women don't trust their body to do this, then there's some work to be done
Right.
around, the body's capacity. And sometimes it's because the body got signals previously that things weren't safe, that the body wasn't capable. So there might be an opportunity for some trauma work that has
Yeah.
nothing to do with the pregnancy or the birth.
Yeah.
And I really believe in doing that work during the pregnancy because the baby receives the benefits of that resolution as well.
Yeah. Very well said. Yeah, it's so interesting when framed like that to be this very potent medicine that forces you or asks of you, doesn't force you, of course, it asks of you to do the work to kind of uncover what's hiding in those nooks and crannies of your unconscious that gets a little tickled by something, a fear story, for example. Like, I've heard you say how important it is to be careful about who you even allow into your story, how you plan to birth, etc., because of the potential seeds of doubt that people can plant or the scary stories that you can inherit. So not only why is it important for who you allow in, but what you consume during this period. How much do you think about like having good energetic hygiene during this very delicate period, and what are some top tips?
Yeah, that's the exact phrase I was going to use. It's an exercise in energetic hygiene, and it's a skill. Like that discernment is really a skill that we didn't get, many of us didn't get taught, right?
Hmm.
Again, because it's like, well, I don't feel comfortable with that person. And it's like, well, so what? They're a family member, you know,
Yeah.
be with them, connect with them. And it's like, but my body's telling me no. And it's like, suppress that, silence it, right? So we didn't really get good learning when it comes to energetic hygiene. So this is an opportunity to do that. And it can feel scary because when we release something or someone, it threatens our survival, you know, especially someone who's been a primary figure in our lives, but maybe
Right.
has always incited a sense of maybe low grade danger because they're not a safe presence. So to be able to do that in the pregnancy is huge. But it's a practice that will then serve you as a parent,
Yeah.
because if we don't learn that discernment now at this kind of like final gate, let's say, it's not, it's going to be challenging as a parent to teach that to our own children. And then, of course, as there was this kind of, arc that you went into. You get on the other side, you're in the early stages of parenting, and there are a lot of decisions to make. It doesn't end at the birth. You're then
Right.
having family, potentially medical providers, if you go to the pediatrician, teachers, society, government, whatever, telling you that these are all the things you're supposed to do now with this
Yeah.
child.
Yeah.
It's almost like there's this acquisition that happens socially that this child belongs to us as well, and we get to decide, right? It's
Yes.
mandated that you do this to your child. And so we come into contact with, okay, energetic hygiene again. And how do I practice that discernment?
Yeah.
I have clients that they'll say to me, well, I don't want this for the baby. I don't want that exam. I don't want these shots. I don't want that. And I'm like, then why are you going to the pediatrician at all if you don't want any of the things that they're offering?
Yeah.
And they're like, oh, I didn't know that I couldn't, or I didn't
Mm.
know that was a choice. I'm like, yeah, everything is a choice. Like, are you just willing to live with the consequences of your choices? So
Yeah.
I'd say just a great opportunity to start practicing that discernment that we might have not learned and what comes up. Because if we have someone who triggers this sense of potential threat, first, that's something to look at. How do I shift this relationship? What boundaries do I need to draw in order
Yeah.
to start minimizing that? could a lot of this potential threat that I'm experiencing also be a projection because of my other experiences? And then do I want them to be a part of this?
Mhm.
I've had many anxious family members come into the birth room or want to be a part of the experience. And some of my clients have said, I would feel better supported by you if you were to come postpartum,
Yeah.
not
Yeah.
during the birth itself, right? And that feels huge for a lot of people to say, but it's so important
It is.
because the body needs to go into full surrender during this transition period.
Yeah.
And that's also why it's very counterintuitive for many people that someone would birth in a space where there's a lot of strangers, like a hospital,
Mm.
right?
Mm.
And so we look at instances of, delayed labor, failure to progress is what they call it. Things
Mhm.
are really slow to pick up, or even a woman might stop dilating at a certain point, maybe when there's a shift change with the nurse, or maybe there's one comment that's made to the woman that sets off a cascade
Yeah.
of,
Yeah.
cortisol in her system, and there you go. So
That's it.
it's very important who's there, not only energetically, but because of the potential threat that we might experience, and how it can impact the unfolding of labor.
Wow. Yeah. I have friends who have shared stories about like how they were fully in labor and then they transferred to the hospital and there you go, it stopped. It's like,
Right.
oh, that's crazy. I wonder why that happened. It would have nothing to do with your animal body sensing that this is a completely foreign environment and you're now being hooked up to a machine and the LED flickering lights overhead and it's this cold room and this stranger you've never seen is prodding and probing you and the fact that that has actually become so normalized is actually kind of crazy when you think about it for a
Oh, it's
second.
totally
But
disturbing.
it's so strange.
But this is what I'm saying. We approach birth from such a logical cerebral perspective and we say hospital safe, hospital good, this is where the outcomes are the best. None of that comes from intuition.
No.
So if we were to actually get in touch with that, which is what I was suggesting to him, is what do you actually want and what's stopping you from getting there? And if we can decouple that, then we'll see that the decision to birth in certain settings that don't actually feel good and safe to the animal body, they're all purely logical,
Yeah. Yeah.
often based on fear.
Yeah. Yeah. I had a teacher say to me once, don't ignore when the body speaks for what the
Yeah.
mind thinks. And that's exactly what you're describing, right? You've got this intuitive knowing that I could do this somewhere else where I feel safe, but my logical monkey fear center brain is like, but what if die? It goes to the worst case scenario, right? So, oh, well, I guess I have to now ignore my intuition. I have to hand over my locus of authority to someone with a DR in front of the name because we've been conditioned since we were this big to follow the experts and trust the person who is smarter than you. And that's just such a major wound, right? It's such a major wound to our
Yeah.
sovereignty to ever hopefully getting that back again. Like once you've handed that over and you realize that you've given one of the most precious moments and you betrayed your own intuition, it can be hard to face. You know, that you use that word responsibility, and I think there's a huge piece of radical responsibility that's required to even entertain birthing in an alternative way, because you have to face the totality of all of it. That yeah, you have to put all the cards on the table. You have to say this could happen and I'm okay with it because this feels right. And it's the biggest surrender experiment in the world, right? It's got to be the biggest surrender experiment to do what we did. What I say we, my wife did mostly, and I just believed in her conviction and her confidence, and knew that my role to play in that was to not plant any negative juju or negative vibes in her mind, but to support her and to just make sure she had what she needed so she could do what she was born to do. And it was incredible.
Yeah.
But yeah, what a heck of a radical trust and surrender experiment that is.
Yeah, it really is. It really is a dance with death because you just there is actually a tradition in Western Africa where the woman, oh gosh, sorry, I can't remember the name of the tribe at the moment, but I've cited it before. And the woman, when she goes into labor, actually goes out into the bush by herself.
Hmm.
And she comes back when she has the baby, but it's their form of initiation, and
Wow.
they call it the dance with death because she's going into the ultimate surrender, not knowing what will
Hmm.
happen. Right?
Hmm.
She's completely at the mercy of her body, the process, and whatever, the powers that be will. And so it's a deeply spiritual experience, and we've removed the spirituality from birth and pregnancy and marriage and so many
Yeah.
things.
Yeah, so many things. And in a sense, that dance with death is really beautiful, because when the woman comes back with the baby, she has died in a sense. She's
Yeah.
had a death of everything that she was before, and now she's born into this new divine, like crazy, scary, big role of like, wow, I'm actually a mother now. Like, I'm holding this life that I created. And from the male's perspective here too, that shift is very palpable in a man as a dad. I always say that, like, one of the scariest things for me being a husband watching my wife get pregnant is that I didn't know that I wanted to be a dad. I actually
Mm,
thought that I was kind of broken. I was like, I'm not really excited about this, and was feeling a bit selfish about all the things that I was telling myself how my life was going to change. I wasn't going to be able to do this until the moment I touched the baby. And then, thank God, I just had this like, oh, okay, cool. I love this
yeah.
person. I love this being. And my life shifted radically. But I think also, to some earlier points you made, there was no one really to talk to about this as a guy in particular. It was just kind of like, just kind of shut up, stay out of the way. And, when the baby's born, keep mama well fed and look after them. And yeah, it was an initiation for me also. So like, there is a death in birth, in the fact that your old identity dies to this whole new chapter of crazy, beautiful life.
Yeah, absolutely. There really isn't a place for men given. It's been really stripped away, and men are trying to find their way in, well, if I can't feed the baby, what can I do? It's almost like, how do I replace I'll never replace the mother's role. And that's just kind of the idea that men have, like it'll never be as important or something. So we don't realize that there's actually so many ways, and there are hormone releases that do
Mm.
happen with the man. There's a lot of bonding that happens, through baby massage, through
Yeah.
carrying the baby, through even co-sleeping with the baby.
Yeah.
And the way that things are now, most men report that they don't feel an initial bond or drive connection with the baby until the baby's around 6 months, because that's when the baby starts interacting, responding to the environment, smiling, engaging with the father. They're like, oh, okay, now I love you. Now I see you. Now
Yeah.
this is
Yeah.
real. However, if we were given, if we were giving men more opportunities for that, apart from just like diaper changes and taking care of house stuff, which is like, it's not about it is about making the mother's lessening her load, but the tasks of the father have to have that deeper value and purpose, which is the unique bond that nobody else has with the baby except the
Yeah.
father.
Yeah.
So, there's a lot missing there as well, and there's a lot of opportunity there.
Yeah.
We want that testosterone drop to happen after the birth, so that the man does want to nurture,
Hmm.
in a different way than the mother. It's never going to look the same. It's going to be equally important, but different. So we
Yeah.
want that testosterone drop, but it doesn't happen because we don't give men those opportunities.
Yeah. 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 It's really seeing the kind of complete picture of the complementary opposites. I think something you speak about, and I agree too, is this distortion of our roles. Women trying to play the male role, which emasculates the man, and then he's left all effeminated, and he basically becomes the woman, and it's like it's topsy turvy, and it's no longer this nice complete yin and yang of the white fish and the black fish dancing beautifully, and that line between order and chaos. It's like, who knows what the fuck's going on here, but nobody feels great about it. And I think culturally
Yeah.
that's what we're seeing. Talk to me a little bit about how you see the modern gender roles rift, and what's happening inside of homes.
Yeah, I mean, we're in the after effects of many waves of feminism, which served the individual so much, or it's perceived that it served the individual so much. However, what it ended up doing was completely tarnishing what could be a healthy, balanced relationship, right?
Yeah.
So in this drive for independence and in this drive for emancipation, that also, destroyed what might be that healthy dynamic and equal roles that are completely different. You know, um, And so we have that, we're in the after effects of that and still going on. And we also have the way that families and men and women are portrayed in media.
Yeah.
We have Homer Simpson and Al Bundy and, Peppa Pig's dad, and they're all just dum-dums.
Yeah.
And,
Yeah.
you don't respect them. They're useless. They fumble around, and it's always the wife trying to like get things in order. Even the Bernstein Bears, I mean, the guy was like they were always on the brink of like some sort
Yeah.
of catastrophe until the mother like fixed it, right? And then we have Disney, which is like all these absent mothers,
Mm.
and then the only way that there's like salvation is by partnering with this really unrealistic version of a man.
Mhm. Mhm.
So, like, this is all going into the unconscious minds
Of
of
course.
children. And so we really don't have a clear picture of what these roles look like. We don't have a blueprint. And then within our own family systems, if we're blessed, we can see somewhat of a healthy blueprint of relating and balance. And so I'd say right now it's a difficult time, to navigate where can I find that balance? What does it mean? What is healthy relating? And so the journey begins with understanding our own attachment, how we
Mm.
were raised, and becoming whole and realizing that there are many things that I can do on my own. And there are also many things that I could receive and offer in this dynamic that would then amplify and create something bigger and greater than me and then this other person. We create, this third body together. And that looks very different for everyone because
Yeah.
again, there's sociocultural influences, right? There's, you know, a lot of transactional influences, this
Mhm.
reciprocity in relationship, and that looks different for everyone. So what a man might consider to be valuable currency in the dynamic is very different than what the woman considers to be valuable currency in the dynamic,
Yeah.
and, you know, without going into like the love languages, for example, it's like, acts of service. This is how the man might perceive love and attention and devotion to the relationship, to the marriage. And the woman
Yeah.
might say, well, for me, it's this other thing. And so when two people don't see the other one contributing, then we withhold. And then one person becomes dominant, and then one person takes on more responsibility. And so it's a matter of us really reflecting on how we can
Yeah.
become securely and healthily attached,
Yeah.
and what we want from this dynamic, and what we can receive, and allowing ourselves to receive, men and
Mm.
women.
Mm. Very good point. Yeah. That's reminding me of another quote. Sorry, I can't forget the author's name, but something along the lines of unspoken expectations are premeditated resentments. That's
Mm.
what most people are doing, is not actually honestly openly communicating their needs. Maybe they don't even know, which is kind of crazy because they haven't actually sat and sifted them out. Of course, they'll feel a certain need that isn't being fulfilled, and they'll probably then meet it in a distorted way. But they have to first kind of ask themselves, what do I really want, like you're describing here? And then actually have the conversation with the partner. Assume that your partner is at least as dumb as you are and they can't read your mind, and you guys should talk it out. And that those skills are really, really beneficial because they will lead to you being able to be honest and open in future conversations around things like birth. Because I do think that what happens for a lot of couples is they just kind of enter into this thing, and about where the buck stops is that they want to have a kid, and then it's a little bit unconscious, and all of a sudden, 9 months later, they've delivered in a hospital, and they're trying to, do you want the vitamin K shot, do you want your son circumcised? And they're kind of looking at each other like, yeah, yep, that sounds good. And because they haven't just like had a good honest, hard conversation. And I know that can be tricky because sometimes you might disagree, and conflict is a thing. But if you avoid that healthy conflict in your relationship, you're only going to start a war within yourself that's going to build over years into resentment and all other manner of things. So I know it sounds cliche, but communication.
Well, I mean, yeah, totally. And oh my God, what happens when like having needs as a child was incredibly dangerous, right? Like
Mm,
for you to have any kind, like as a boy, if you had an emotional need and it overwhelmed your mother and she shut down, it's like, okay, if I want mommy to stay connected and nurturing and calm, I need to have no needs.
That's
And
right. Yeah.
so then what ends up happening is like get into relationship because we're relational beings, and it's like a lot of resentment builds, and needs are not expressed. And it's like at one point, it's like, I don't want any of this. I didn't want
Yeah.
that thing. I didn't want that wallpaper. I didn't want the kid, but no one said anything.
Yeah. Yeah.
So it goes so much. That first step is really saying, what did I need to do in order to survive? And how am I still doing it now?
Mm,
And how do I really anchor in the fact that I am safe and can provide that for myself, and that if I express this thing, if I ask for this thing, it's going to be okay.
yeah.
We have to retrain our nervous system to understand that it's not just up here in the head, you know?
Yeah.
So our partner might say, I'm willing to give it to you, right? Just ask me, what do you need? But it's like, we first have to train our system into understanding that it's safe to say the thing.
Yeah.
And it's there, sometimes there isn't that union between the mind and the body. And so sometimes the body takes longer to catch up, and the desire to survive is so great that
Yeah.
it might take a while, it might take a lot of work.
Oh, so good. So good. Yeah. Lots of work to be done there. All right.
And
I want to
play and play.
and
we
play. Yeah.
we
Look at
can
that.
play, like
I
a
love
lot of
that.
the nervous system reset is play.
Yeah. I'm glad you said that. Yeah. I always try to remember to say that too, because sometimes all of this stuff can feel like such serious business, and it
I
is,
know.
because it's the life that you get to live, and what's more serious than that? And hopefully alchemizing a bunch of joy and meaning, and bringing another life into this world, and not fucking them up, and giving them an amazing role model and stuff. Like, oh geez, that's a lot of pressure. It is, but you can hold it lightly in your hands. You can take a little. Firstly, you're not going to be perfect. I'm certainly not. I'm sure you're not. We're trying our best with the tools that we've got, and we've probably made a bunch of mistakes. But humble ourselves before whatever this thing of life is, and say, like, yeah, just don't forget to not take it too seriously, because it can feel really heavy at times.
Yeah.
All right, I wanted to talk about postpartum depression before I got too far away from that conversation, because is it safe to say we're in an epidemic of postpartum depression, and what do you think's going on there?
Yeah, I mean, if we look at the numbers, 1 out of 10 women worldwide is dealing, dealing with navigating postpartum depression. And not just the typical postpartum blues that are a result of hormonal shifts that, might bring on some weeping or some, you know, low grade anxiety or shifts. This is, serious postpartum
Mhm.
depression that can be debilitating. So I would say it's an epidemic, and I would say that our understanding of it is really minimal. Like we're still saying that it's hereditary. We're still saying it's primarily hormonal. We're still saying that, it might be due to a lack of support. We're not really recognizing that unprocessed birth trauma, compounded by the demands that we've placed on ourselves socially,
Mm,
might be the main cause of what's going on here. There's also, of course, the nutrition element. Women are deeply malnourished going into pregnancy, throughout their pregnancy, and then they end up in postpartum at their most depleted state.
right, right.
Often with a lot of inflammatory markers that are exacerbated by the demands of postpartum. So, it's a combination of things. And, our solution currently is to medicate,
Mm,
just to kind of diffuse it enough to the point that we can then manage it. So it's just like, take this to diffuse it so that you can actually function, and you won't be on it forever. We'll figure it out. That's really often what I hear. However, we don't talk about the addictive nature of these substances, and we don't talk about how it then impacts breastfeeding and other elements, because there are so many side effects. So that's the current solution at the moment.
yeah, that doesn't sound very holistic or
No.
hopeful. And I
No.
don't know, I'm far from a depression expert, but I've had enough clients who have told me they've being on an SSRI or some kind of medication like that. And whilst it does help negate some of the negative effects, it kind of just has this overall dulling effect. It's kind of pleasure and pain principle, right? That they operate on a similar kind of neuronal pathway. So if you kind of like dumb down or lessen the depressive episodes, you also massively lower the ceiling for how happy you can feel. And I
Yeah.
imagine that a huge part of bonding has to be the elation and the joy and the connection, which I'm sure also is very intricately connected to breastfeeding. So again, we focus on this negative thing where we're really missing the elephant in the room of all those things you just described and saying, hey, just take this pill, take the edge off, but also now, causing massive unintended consequences because we also can't feel the joy that coexists in these moments too.
Absolutely. And we're not getting to the root cause of the issue,
Yeah.
And so, okay, the initial postpartum, is over. Now we're in this other phase. And now it's slowly, we're perceiving that it's becoming a distant memory, but it's there underneath the surface. And the postpartum depression symptoms can get reactivated, 18 months
Mm,
down the line. So it's really about addressing the root causes of it, which could stem back to former traumas prior to becoming a mother. It could
mm,
be dynamics in the relationship. It's very often a lack of support as well. Women just are not set up for, with that kinship that we once were, where women were supporting each other in raising babies together, right? So it's like I'm able to focus on breastfeeding because they're taking care of the food and the other kids are here and someone else is taking care of this task. And they would just continue to switch off or switch on to the next and on to the next, depending on who was giving birth. And that was the
mm.
support system. So, we say, well, this is a luxury. Postpartum support is a luxury. This is something that is only accessible to certain women. I can't afford a postpartum doula. I can't bring a housekeeper in. I can't bring someone in to do meal prep. Yet we're not considering that there could be an allocation or reorganization of funds and priorities, right?
Yeah.
So we
Yeah.
place a lot of emphasis on other things, and the problem is that we haven't really internalized how important this period is for the success of
Mm,
the family. So, a baby shower, right? Like one of the most silly rituals because it's very often empty. It's not connected for the man, it's not connected for the woman. It's
no.
really an acquisition ritual to make sure that there's things in place so that there's the crib and there's the this and there's the that, and a slight acknowledgement of the woman's transition into motherhood.
Yeah.
you know
Yeah.
and so in this time, can we allocate resources? Can we ask for postpartum doula services, like
Right.
rather than a $1,000 swing? I don't know, or whatever it is that people order. Like, what kind of a parent am I going to be? What are we going
Yeah.
to do? What does a baby really need? I mean, I'll tell you, you need a small investment in cloth diapers and a
Yeah.
few outfits and a
Yeah.
baby sling. So after that, what do you really need? You'll figure it out once the baby arrives. As the
Yeah.
baby's there integrating into the family, you'll learn the baby. You'll say, oh, it'd be really helpful to have this.
Yeah.
Okay, let's get it. It would be really helpful to have that. So many women and men end up donating half the things that they get, or the baby
Mhm.
never uses them, or they, regift them, or whatever it is, or they sit in storage. All of that energy and consumption, it can be directed towards creating a postpartum experience that's going to support the woman. We
Yeah.
just don't know. We just, as a society, don't know the relevance, and we don't understand how important it is to create the conditions for a better postpartum.
Wow. So well said. Yeah. It's back to that reoccurring theme you mentioned that disconnected people do disconnected pregnancies, disconnected birth, echoes on forever, basically. My wife just this weekend hosted a blessing way for a
Mm.
friend, and we were actually having this exact conversation basically about how stupid baby showers are. And they're good natured, people want to,
Of course.
hey, here's your list and here's the Amazon thing. But you're so right, you don't need 90% of that nonsense. It's just consumerism has co-opted the baby world now as it does everything. And there's a complete lack, or maybe 95% lack of the reverence for the mother and what she's about to embark on, and some intentional positive energy and prayer and ceremony and all of that stuff that really should be forefront of everybody's mind, instead of which car seat are they going to get, or can they get the most expensive stroller and such.
Yeah, and ideally, the woman's not leaving the house for the first 6 weeks or 40
Right, right.
days, and so you don't need the car seat.
Yeah,
Like, it's just a way of thinking, really.
yeah, yeah.
And, it's just, are we going to go into autopilot based on what everybody else has done and what I'm reading on the internet, or am I going to actually reflect on the way in which I'm gonna engage with my baby and the
Mm,
environment? And if I
mm.
don't have the answers, then I'll just wait till the birth, and once I have the baby, I'll know.
Yeah, you'll figure it out. It'll be all right. Yeah. I always encourage the listener to live life by design, not by default. Because I
Yeah.
think living life by default is just doing what was supposed to do, apparently, because everybody else did it. And I think it really applies to everything that you've been talking about today. And I know we're tight on time here, but I would be remiss to let you go without asking you your thoughts on geriatric pregnancies. Are they a thing? What's going on with that term?
Oh, yeah. Oh my gosh, so it's so funny. That term is like, it's a giggle, but, yeah, so a woman who is older than 35, and if she becomes pregnant, she's considered a geriatric pregnancy. And it's always so funny to me because I wonder, like, okay, so she's 34, and then what happens? Like, she turns 35 a month later, and suddenly there's like
That's
all
it.
this risk,
Yeah,
like
game
what
over.
is like linear time is just a funny concept to me for so
Yeah.
many reasons. But yeah, and so she's encouraged to do additional screenings, ultrasounds, additional blood work, just to keep a closer eye on things.
Mm,
They'll say that her placenta could age more quickly. The calcification of the placenta is not typically something that I've analyzed over, let's say at this point, 2,000 placentas, and I've seen calcification happen in maybe a dozen of them.
mm,
And those clients were giving birth around, 41 and a half, 42 weeks. And it was an even serious calcification.
mm.
Calcification is when you start to see calcium deposits in the placenta. So if there is a lot of it, it could detach from the uterus, which could be dangerous from the baby because now the baby has no oxygen. Have there been cases of calcification in younger placentas, like at 38 weeks, 39 weeks? Possible, in certain circumstances, not common. And so that's going more into the due date
Yeah.
conversation. But as far as a woman being 42 years old and giving birth, I've not seen issues with her placenta. They might also make the argument that because she's older than 35, her eggs were older and she's at higher risk for the baby's at a higher risk for developmental defects. I have not seen that to be the case. It all depends on also how we view Down syndrome, for example, where they say it's more common in older women. I have my personal beliefs about what causes Down syndrome, which, can go into another conversation another time, from more the German new medicine perspective. So,
Mm,
it all depends on how we view these things and what we're willing to believe. I've been at births with 18-year-olds. I used to do a teen mom pro bono program as a doula, and some of them had really challenging experiences, and it didn't matter that they were 16, 17 years old. So physically they were still
yeah.
having challenges, and I've seen home birthing women at 48 years old, you know like a boss.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
I'd say that it's a misconception, and it's just a way for a lot of entities to just cover their bases. But from my perspective, from my smaller petri dish in my world, I really don't see age to be an issue, and I think that term is really damaging to the
Yeah.
psyche and the unconscious mind of the woman.
Oh, no doubt. Yeah. And I think it's refreshing to hear that, because you've been in this game for over a decade and attended a lot of births that, again, your sample size is, as shown what you've seen. But I just think a lot of the times that, no offense, but it's kind of idiots all the way up. And this kind of mystical power that we bestow doctors because they, wear a lab coat, is just a little bit foolish sometimes. Because, like I started the conversation with, and this is a good place to end it. That first pin post on your profile described exactly what happened to us. And the doctor, after seeing the ultrasound, said, I can't remember verbatim, but some ridiculous things because my wife was at 41 weeks at this point. So he
Mm,
said terms like, the placenta is going to be shriveled like a prune and you've got no amniotic fluid. And that started the treatment, and that started the low dose pitocin. Let's see how the baby respond, and the decelerating heart rate, and the rest of it is history.
wow.
Anyway, my wife, after the fact, asked like, how did the placenta look? What was the fluid like? They were like, oh yeah, you look great, totally fine. So these things, they just kind of like make up off a, not out to be malicious, but just I don't know, just really take everything with a grain of salt, like you say in that post. Get a second opinion, get a third opinion. If you don't want to run into that issue at all, don't even go for an opinion. Just trust in the process, which is what we did the second time around. And
Right.
it's just
Right.
crazy out there.
And this is where that idea of taking full responsibility comes in.
Yeah,
Because if you can take full responsibility for this, then those things don't matter. They're just
don't matter.
opinions. Because what they're doing is they're wanting to make sure that in the event anything should happen, they've already alerted you. So a
That's right.
lot of it is just preventative, it's hypothetical. It's not often rooted in fact or hard evidence. And this is where I tell women and men, where's the hard evidence?
Yeah,
And it's like, well, no, this could happen based on certain things.
yeah.
So if that's enough for you to go on, then that's enough for you to go on. But it's not enough for me to go on. I just
So
have a
true.
different relationship to the process.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. And that's really what that's why this conversation has been so beautiful, because I guess we've all got different set points where we're comfortable at. And I think the kind of person that listens to this show is leaning a little bit more to the adventurous sovereign side of things, that is like, yeah, I do believe in health, I do believe in the ancestral wisdom a little bit, and I want to cultivate that in. And I think you've asked some really poignant questions and reflections today to get people to sink into that a little bit more, and
Yeah.
just make a truly informed decision with how you want to do this thing called life and this thing called birth, if you get the honor to do it one day. And if you've had a birth and it didn't go the way that you've planned, I hope there was some wisdom here as well from Eyla to know that it's always possible to re-alchemize that story and have a redemption arc. So where can people go to continue to connect with you, potentially work with you? What are you up to? What's new and what's exciting for you?
Yeah, so at uncoveringbirth.com, we have a lot of resources for women who want to conceive, how to integrate the male into this process, where is your role and what it can be. Pregnancy class, so a signature pregnancy class, postpartum resources, infertility resources, kind of alternative perspectives on infertility. And then we have a lot of resources for women who want to become doulas, want to become birth educators. We have a postpartum doula training that's just about to start in a few months. So whatever you're looking for, we can always support you. And if we don't have it, we can always point you in an appropriate direction that's at your at where you want to be and at your level and what you're up to. So yeah, uncoveringbirth.com, and then on Instagram, I'm in and out of there.
Yeah, there you go. And thank you for looking after the bros too. Thank you for, finding a place for us in this process. It's refreshing.
Yeah,
And
my
thank you,
pleasure.
Ayla. You're awesome. This has been awesome. I'm sure we'll run it back again in the future. And
Yeah.
you lot, we will see you next week. Stay radical. Peace. All right, friends, thanks for tuning in to another episode of Radical Health Radio. We got a fresh new podcast for you every Wednesday. If you enjoyed the show, consider liking, subscribing, reviewing, and rating us on your podcast platform. It helps to spread this message of radical health. We'll see you next week.